In episode 65, Verify Component Pedigree and Provenance to Reduce Risk, we focus on how to ensure that every software component you depend on comes from a trusted source and remains unaltered from origin to deployment. Modern systems are built from layers of open-source libraries, third-party modules, and internal code, and each one can be a doorway for supply chain attacks if its history is unknown. By treating pedigree and provenance as first-class security properties, you move beyond "it builds and passes tests" to "we know where it came from, who touched it, and why we trust it." That mindset is the foundation for resisting tampering, hijacks, and hidden backdoors in your dependencies. One of the most effective starting points is to require signed commits, tags, and releases from upstream maintainers wherever the tooling permits. Signed commits provide a cryptographic link between changes in the repository and the individuals or automation accounts that made them, which makes impersonation and silent tampering far more difficult. Signed tags and releases extend that assurance to the points where versions are cut and published, making it easier to prove that a given artifact truly reflects what the maintainers intended to ship. As you evaluate components, you look for projects that use strong signing practices consistently, not just occasionally. Over time, your intake policies can prioritize or even require this behavior, steering you toward ecosystems where identity and integrity are treated seriously. Checksums add another line of defense by confirming that the artifact you download is exactly the one that was published. For each component, you can compare locally computed checksums against official values published in authoritative registries or release notes, rather than trusting a single channel. This verification helps catch corrupted downloads, man-in-the-middle tampering, or unauthorized repackaging. In controlled environments, you can maintain your own internal registry of approved artifacts and associated checksums, using it as the reference point for builds and deployments. When checksum verification becomes a standard part of your pipeline, it quietly and consistently raises the cost of successful supply chain attacks. Secure transport is just as important as signed artifacts, which is why consuming components through trusted channels with transport layer security, TLS, and certificate pinning policies is essential. When clients verify server certificates properly and TLS is configured with modern protocols and cipher suites, it becomes much harder for attackers to inject malicious artifacts into the download path. Certificate pinning, or constrained trust stores, can further reduce exposure by narrowing which certificate authorities or certificates are accepted for critical registries. Internal mirrors and proxies can also act as controlled gateways, enforcing TLS policies and centralizing auditing of all artifact retrievals. By paying attention to how components travel across the network, you ensure that integrity protections do not end at the repository boundary. Deterministic builds add another layer of assurance by making it possible to reproduce binaries from source and compare results. In a deterministic build, given the same source code, dependencies, and environment, you should obtain identical outputs bit for bit. When that property holds, you can rebuild or release yourself and validate that the binary you received matches what the source would produce, narrowing the space for hidden manipulations. Achieving determinism can be challenging because compilers, timestamps, and build scripts often introduce variability, but many ecosystems now provide guidance and tooling to move in that direction. For components that handle cardholder data or critical cryptographic functions, investing in deterministic build workflows can pay substantial dividends in confidence. Visibility into what is inside each component is crucial, which is where a software bill of materials, SBOM, becomes central. An SBOM lists direct and transitive dependencies, versions, and often associated licenses, letting you see the full tree of code you are indirectly pulling into your environment. With that information, you can correlate known vulnerabilities against specific components, identify problematic licenses, and understand which teams or systems rely on shared libraries. Generating SBOMs for your own builds and requesting them from suppliers creates a consistent inventory across internal and external software. When SBOM data is tracked over time, it supports both proactive risk reduction and rapid response when a new vulnerability is disclosed. Provenance records push deeper by capturing how and where an artifact was produced, including the build system, source repository, and key inputs. Frameworks like Supply Chain Levels for Software Artifacts, SLSA, and technologies such as In Toto provide structured ways to create attestations that describe each step in the pipeline. These attestations can show, for example, that code came from a particular branch, passed specific tests, and was built by a controlled continuous integration and continuous delivery (CI/CD) system using a defined configuration. When stored securely and linked to the artifact, provenance attestations let you distinguish trusted builds from ad hoc or potentially compromised ones. In regulated or high-assurance environments, this level of traceability can be a compelling part of your evidence story. To turn these assurances into enforceable practice, you establish admission policies that automatically block unsigned, unverified, or policy-violating components from entering sensitive environments. For container platforms, admission controllers can check signatures, provenance attestations, and SBOM metadata before allowing workloads to start. Package managers and internal artifact repositories can enforce similar rules, rejecting downloads or deployments that fail integrity checks or feature disallowed licenses. This automation moves enforcement from best effort to default behavior, allowing engineers to move quickly while still respecting security gates. When exceptions are needed, they can be documented, approved, and time-limited rather than quietly bypassing controls. Even with strong gates, upstream repositories themselves can become targets, so monitoring them for signs of trouble is part of modern provenance hygiene. You watch for hijacks, such as maintainer accounts being compromised or packages being transferred to unknown owners, which can signal a shift in trustworthiness. Sudden bursts of unexpected commits, unusual changes to release practices, or unexplained publication of new binaries may also warrant closer inspection. Community advisories, maintainer communications, and reputation signals all contribute to this monitoring picture. By combining technical checks with social and behavioral cues, you reduce the chance of being surprised by a compromised or abandoned project. Version pinning is another important practice, but it needs to be intentional and disciplined rather than accidental. Pinning specific versions of components helps you avoid silently inheriting breaking changes or newly introduced vulnerabilities, but it also creates the risk of falling behind on critical patches. To manage this tension, you schedule regular reviews where pinned versions are evaluated against available updates, deprecations, and known issues. These reviews may lead to planned upgrade projects, compensating controls, or, in some cases, decisions to retire a dependency entirely. When version pinning is coupled with deliberate review cycles, you gain stability without sacrificing long-term security. Despite all preventive measures, suspicious artifacts will occasionally appear, and having a quarantine process ready can prevent hasty, risky decisions. Quarantined components can be moved into sandbox environments where they are analyzed for unexpected network behavior, unusual system calls, or malicious payloads. Threat intelligence and community advisories can shed light on whether the broader ecosystem has observed similar issues or patterns. During this period, Temporary blocks or throttles can prevent deployment into production until the investigation is complete. By treating suspicion as a normal signal rather than an exception, you normalize careful analysis and avoid impulsive trust. Throughout all these activities, maintaining evidence trails is essential for audits, customer assurances, and rapid incident investigations. You record which artifacts were used in which builds, what checks they passed, and which attestations or SBOM snapshots were associated with them. When an incident occurs, this record allows you to quickly identify which systems might be affected by a compromised component or vulnerable version. For customers and regulators, documented provenance and verification steps demonstrate that your organization has not treated supply chain risk lightly. Over time, these evidence trails form a backbone of institutional memory that supports continuous improvement and accountability. At this stage, a brief mental review helps connect the different facets of pedigree and provenance assurance into a coherent whole. You start with signatures on commits, tags, and releases, then reinforce them with checksum verification against trusted sources. Deterministic builds and SBOM generation deepen your understanding of what is inside each artifact and how it was produced. Provenance attestations and admission enforcement ensure that only components meeting defined trust criteria enter sensitive paths. Together, these elements combine with monitoring, quarantine procedures, and evidence trails to create a supply chain that is observable, verifiable, and resistant to quiet manipulation. Verifying component pedigree and provenance in this comprehensive manner changes the nature of your software supply chain from hopeful to demonstrably trustworthy. For someone in a security role, it means being able to explain, with evidence, why a critical library or service is acceptable in a payment environment and how you would detect if that status changed. A practical next step is to audit one critical library that underpins payment processing or cryptographic functions, documenting its signatures, checksums, SBOM data, and provenance information. From there, enabling provenance verification gates in your build or deployment pipeline turns that single audit into a repeatable control. As this approach scales, your organization gains both technical resilience and a stronger, more credible story for assessors, partners, and customers. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.